All right, everybody, welcome to the breakout session. I'm just going to go ahead and start with a few reminders. Keep all your microphones muted. Questions for our presenters may be presented or submitted in the chat box. However, due to time limitations, we may not be able to answer questions during the presentation. So that any questions that are not answered will be answered on the Summit website. A recording of this webinar will be available. Presentations and supporting documents will be posted on the website. And thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you. Our speaker is Gilbert Lewis III of Grants, New Mexico. He is an enrolled tribal member with the Pueblo of Acoma. Mr. Lewis graduated from Grants High School in May 2002. Gilbert Lewis became a firefighter in 2002 at the Pueblo of Acoma. Mr. Lewis then went on to Albuquerque Fire Rescue in 2005. His current position is inspector with the Fire Marshal's Office. In 2016, Mr. Lewis was a member of the Council for Native American Farmer and Ranchers. In 2018, Acoma No. 8 Ranch received Outstanding Ranchers of the Year. In 2020, Mr. Lewis became business partners with Trilogy Beef, where they grow, harvest, process, package, and sell their own beef. Mr. Lewis is proud to carry the tradition of ranching as a third-generation rancher on the Pueblo of Acoma. Mr. Lewis will be presenting on being a multi-generational rancher and how adapting from generations before has helped him to make a profit with the cattle business. Afterwards, we'll have a question and answer session followed by a short break. With that, I open the floor or Zoom window to Mr. Gilbert Lewis III, and just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide. Thank you.
So good morning, everybody. This is Gilbert Lewis III from Pueblo of Acoma. Just gonna touch up on what the trials and tribulations of being a fourth generation here in New Mexico on the Pueblo of Acoma. It's tough as always. I mean, the presentations before drought, we're always fighting drought. I think that's something we're always in a constant state of here in New Mexico. So I guess to the ones before us, I don't know how they did it, but thankful they adapted and thrived, and we're overcame those obstacles as ranchers and farmers. We've always had to deal with plenty of hardships. Nothing ever goes right. So I'll touch on a couple of those and also touch on what I would call the new age of entities out there willing to help the ranchers and farmers. Next slide, please. All right, so this slide, I named homage to the old ones before me. I paid tribute to my grandparents. I didn't list my great-grandpa on here, but he was the one kind of, I guess, as Native Americans here in the Pueblo of Acoma, we kind of always been dry farming. And so with that's kind of been the history on how, come from hunter gathering to farming, was a big transition. And, it's funny that I have this slide on here because I just recently, I'm fortunate enough to still have one of my grandparents, Gilbert Lewis Sr. He does, I know I just have raised bovine and horses, but he also does farming. And got to talking to him about this presentation and asking him, what would you like the future to go, your future generations? And he said he would still like to see us farm and grow our own food, just because we know it, the love and the care and respect that we put into that time it's a seedling to the time it produces fruit. We know where it came from. It grew from our love, our attention, and everything that we put into it. So, and the same goes for ranching. He said it's a little bit more economical. With farming, you can never tell what's going to happen. You get a hailstorm, wipe out your crops, or you can get a drought. And I know on the Pueblo of Acoma, we have a huge water. We can't get. It's hard for the ranch or farmers to get water to their crops, and so they try to prioritize it by actual crops. And then or fruit bearing crops, or like your corn, your melons, etc. And then from there, the second bunch of water goes to the pastures for alfalfa and whatnot for livestock. So there's a couple of challenges, but with that, we're able to meet them and address them and kind of move forward. The first listing I have on there, Tony and Lucy Garcia, senior, sorry. They raise sheep and horses. Back then, sheep was the big thing on the Pueblo of Acoma. I think everybody had sheep, and so, you know, the livestock that we raise along with the fruit or the farming that we do, it all ties back into our religion and culture. And so with that, you know, we're out there praying for our animal, out there praying for our crops, you know, praying for the rain. So that's heavily embedded into our whether we grow food or whether we're grow. I guess it all comes down to growing food. You know, you're either growing your sheep, your cattle, or you're growing crops. And so with that, it all ties back into it. Even the little calves that are born, you know, we give them you know, we treat them like almost like our own kids. You know, they're, you know, during branding time, the ladies in our family will actually wash the sheep and the cattle and horses. You know, they'll wash them and kind of just treat them like a newborn. And so kind of like a blessing, and then, you know, kind of, you know, there's a lot more into it than just owning that, only being a cattle owner or livestock owner. And so with that, it was, the economical part was there. And I think that's why a lot of my grandparents went this route. And, you know, I think the biggest thing was that they also knew that they had food. You know, if they needed food, they could harvest one of their livestock. And so that was, I guess, kind of money in the bank, you know, or savings account for a rainy day, just in case things got bad. They knew they would have sources to feed their family. And then the economical part was, of course, with the cattle and sheep. You know, you get to sell the wool, or you get to sell the steers and whatnot. And so with that was also a big savings account in a sense as well. So I think for the most part, you know, the love and the religious side of it really played into a key factor into those parts. I know both my grandpas on my mom and my dad's side have been religious leaders, and so that just, you know, plays more into reinforcement of our culture. The third one down I have is my parents, Gilbert and Recita. You know, we grew. I mean, I can remember back in the day. You know, I joke with my son. You know, we never had a choice growing up, like whether you were gonna go to cattle work or if you wanted to go to cattle work. You know, you just knew every Saturday you better get up early if you want to watch cartoons. And so, you know, I would get up, you know, probably the first one, watch my cartoons and eat my cereal, and everybody would be moving around me. And so you just knew it was time to go. And so it was good upbringing, a lot of values, the responsibility brought into that. And, you know, I think that's, you know, there's a proud ownership in it. And so I think that's why these generations continue. You know, I saw my grandparents do it. I saw my dad do it, you know, and now my son sees his dad doing it, his grandpa still doing it, and even his great grandpa doing it. And I wanted to include a picture, but I couldn't find it. You know, I had my grandpa on a tractor, and then I had my son on the tractor as well. So it's just kind of cool to see the generation there, you know, working together. And so with that, it's just, you know, it's kind of, I guess, I don't want to say our legacy, but it's kind of just, you know, I get your legacy is your own kids, your own family. And so with that, you know, your grandkids, your kids, they see it and they want to do it. And they, you know, now we've made it to where we can actually be profitable. And I think that's huge. And this time of day, you know, given our current economic status of the U.S., that, you know, we're able to, you know, we're trying to get rich, but we're out of, you know, I think we're always staying afloat. And so I'll get into some of the entities later on that, you know, help us stay afloat. So I labeled these individuals here the igniters, just because they saw the benefits of raising livestock, being farmers, being ranchers, and so with that, you know, they provide somewhat of security for their family, and so, you know, I think that's everybody's you know, main goal is to provide that security for your family, making sure they're taken care of, making sure they have something to eat, making sure they have, you know, things take a turn for the south, that they have, you know, they can sell some of their livestock and be okay and weather the storm and whatnot. So, you know, I think that's the bigger picture. They want their future generations, their grandkids, to have something and to fall back on in case things got tough. And so these are the people that I called in igniters, because they had that idea. They're the ones that started the fire in a sense. And so it's been going on for a couple of generations now. So very proud for them to take that leap. I know, sure, it was scary at first, you know, to invest into that opportunity, but, you know, with ins and outs comes risk and reward as well. And so I think we've done all right so far with those risks and rewards. And so again, just, I guess it's kind of touched on this, the bigger picture. You know, our culture is very, you know, heavily intertwined with this as well. So I think our biggest thing was, you know, the keynote here was being self-sustaining ranchers and able to have that sense of security for our families, as I mentioned before. And then again, what goes into that is the land, you know, where we're spraying for animals, the wildlife, the land. And so that's all intertwined into this big picture. It's always, nothing's ever perfect. And so we try to take what we think is perfect to try to help out all these animals and the land that we care for and that we're a part of. And so that's a sense the bigger picture. Next slide. So these are some of the ups and downs. Of course, like I said, nothing's ever perfect. We have lost cattle. Prices aren't always good. And ultimately this, you know, it's tough. It's tough, but there are entities out there, like was mentioned before. I did have the opportunity to take part in some of these programs listed on here. And so with that, these programs from USDA are there to help. And when I sat on that board for Council for Native American Farm and Ranchers out of Washington, you know, I was so surprised and happy that I lived here in New Mexico, because we would hear of some of the, I guess, the horror stories on from other states, even neighboring states, Arizona, Utah. And I praised our offices here in New Mexico that they're doing outstanding work that actually come out and meet with us. So it was really good experience. And so we do practice these. You can see the picture there. We put up fence line. And so we're able to better rotate our animal and help the forage out as well, the land. Next slide. And it just goes into the whole forecast of everything, just staying current with the times, you know, set your goals, always critique yourself, see what you're doing, where you can improve. And then always, you know, like now we're experiencing bad drought in our area, you know, what's next after ranching? You know, this 4 generations, as we all know, we're dying breed. You know, do we continue it on? Do we hold on? You know, always have something ready in the back of your plan, in your mind, for a backup plan. And you know, have a strategy in mind. You know, hopefully we'll try our best to continue this on, whether we have to make changes in our herd management. That's something that we're talking about right now. Next slide. So this is all just from the igniters, you know, everything that's been passed down from generation to generation. I think, you know, everybody, you know, as parents, grandparents, they always want to see the next generation do better. And so with that, you know, hopefully we made our grandparents very proud with some of these accomplishments that we were able to get and receive. And again, just comes from all hard work, as everybody knows. Nothing goes perfect out there on the ranch, so, or on the farm. You know, it's always something. So with that, we just try to do our best as we can, and hopefully improve every year, every time, every generation. Next slide. So with that, we just take the lessons, you know, their stories, and pass them down to future generations again, and try to continue, you know, the tradition. You know, I think that all comes down to is learning, adapting, and then continuing on with the tradition. You know, COVID-19, this is another hiccup, but you know, we're still continuing on. And I forgot to mention on that last slide too that we're also igniters as well. You know, just because the igniters are listed, you know, 3 generations back, 4 generations back, doesn't mean we can't be igniters ourselves. And so we try to ignite new ownership of livestock owners here in the Pueblo. And so we just keep it, you know, going. Like I said, you know, we have to kind of thrive to keep that industry alive. That's it. In short, one day you'll make it. Just keep on pressing on. And so with that, the next slide. And that's all I got. Any questions? Sorry, I kind of rushed in there, but.
Yeah, so you were doing great too, and that's just perfect time. That was a great presentation, and I think that wrapped up a lot of the points that we've been hearing earlier today. You know, with some of the challenges that they had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting with getting those people, getting the younger generation interested in agriculture, and I think what you guys are doing is really great. I didn't know if you wanted to leave off with any further thoughts or advice on that. I think what you were saying about us, you know, being igniters kind of speaks to that as well. But I think we're actually on time. Let me just check the chat. Yeah, so I think that's actually really great. I see here a comments, you know, good to hear that you're involved in the industry in so many levels. But yeah, thank you guys. Thank everyone. Thank you, Mr. Lewis, for sharing that with us. And I think right after this is a break before we start our next session. So thank you.
The next session for this breakout room will be veteran farming programs and resources. So if you're going to stay for that session, you can stay here. If not, the other session that will be offered in the other virtual room is Indigenous Food Sovereignty. So you're free to change. We do have about 15 minutes before that starts, so you'll have a break. But thank you, Mr. Lewis. I know there were a couple questions, if you can see them in the chat box. And if there's still a few people on, I know there was one that said, you know, is there a need for slaughterhouse facilities to serve your needs?
Yes. Can I, is on the chat, is it okay to put my information out there? Or
yes.
Would I just answer them on the chat?
Please do, yes. And it's recorded as well, so everything's captured.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you again for sharing your story.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.